Hello, everybody. It is May 23rd, and this is the OLM community meeting. So we're going to start by just looking at our milestone check-in. So there are two things we can look at actually. So the first one is just our product view, and here you can see the actual status and progress of tickets that define the milestone 4. And so far you can see that we've completed some issues focusing on updating the status of the operator CRs. We removed an existing ready condition, and we have investigated whether or not the operator controller exposes standard runtime metrics, and it seems like we've finished renaming the catalog source to operator catalog. Bruce, that's in reference to the API name, right?
Sorry, what was the question?
So we just changed the name of catalog source to operator catalog.
Right.
Okay.
I think we're just doing catalog at this point. Just catalog source. It's more of a term that we kept using in V0, but then we're just taking this opportunity to, because catalog source is an implementation detail that doesn't make sense to, leak at the product level. So we're just changing that to catalog.
Great. Okay. And
We got plans to put things other than operators in it?
Sorry, what was that?
Do we have plans to put things other than operators in it?
Yes. I mean, if you've read the PRD document, we've had discussions about how we are thinking about extensions being the thing that's there in those op catalogs. So it's definitely, I mean, these are obviously conversations in flight, but.
So you mean moving away from the term operator altogether and calling things extensions?
Not exactly moving away from the term operator, but encompassing other things that are not only operators. Does
Okay.
that?
Cool. That was just a question. I wasn't trying to get anywhere. So thank you.
Of course.
Okay, cool. So, and then we have a whole bunch of stuff in progress and 2 things that haven't been started yet. So let's try and get as much of this over to the right by our end date, which I think is the end of this week. And if we don't hit that goal, we'll reconvene next week and decide if anything needs to be pulled out of the milestone before we cut a release. I am picking up some feedback, by the way, so if you're not muted, please do mute yourself. Great. So going back to the ticket, Jordan, I see that you submitted a topic in which you want to discuss how the last applied configuration is too large when applying updates to CRDs on clusters. Would you care to kick off that conversation?
Sure, thanks, Alex. So this is a conversation which we've had in different contexts a couple of times in the year and a little more since I've been at Red Hat, where if the CRD metadata annotation gets to a certain level, we do kubectl apply, and that annotation becomes too large when we try to apply those CRDs to the cluster. The workaround for that in the past when we get to this level has been to do kubectl create instead, which avoids the last applied configuration annotation creation. And I guess I just wanted to put this back into the conversation, because if this is happening from just trying to apply the OLM CRDs, do we need to take some actions for V0? I mean, if you look at that particular issue in question there, you can see where I walked the guy who had the problem through doing create instead of apply in order to deal with it. And then he's like, well, I can't do a thing. And it's like, well, you only partially installed the thing. And so you got to do the full installation. But so far I haven't been able to identify from the originator of this issue where they were getting their instructions, which are obviously incomplete. My concern was that maybe those instructions were out of date. Or if we needed to make some updates to something. So basically, it just looks like a threshold has been crossed and people are seeing this issue due to the size of our CRDs with what appears to be at least a golden path for installing. I ended up recommending them to use Operator SDK instead because I believe it already does the kubectl create.
Is being recorded.
Whoa.
So there's already an OLM install script as well that
Right.
theoretically does things the right way. Alex, do you know if we talk about kubectl apply anywhere? It could just be that someone just automatically always defaults to doing kubectl apply -f some URL that they find on the internet, which we which won't
yeah.
work.
So typically the issue, I've never seen this issue pop up on install. It's always been on update. And OLM hasn't really supported a update strategy for any of the versions that it releases upstream.
I think this is a
So
problem on install as well.
install.
Yeah,
This is starting from a base clean kind cluster and doing an install.
it's purely, there's nothing that we're doing wrong here. Like at a certain point, your CRD gets to a certain size where if you kubectl apply it, you end up with this last applied configuration or whatever, and that doubles the size of the thing.
Yeah, no, I know that. It's just the official steps for installation are to go to the releases tab, right? And run this install script. And still hearing some background noise.
Yeah, Victor, could you mute your mic, please?
Authoritative evidence body in all of medicine.
Cool. So I'll run this in the background right now, but as far as I know, that if you use this, the official supported installation mode, this succeeds. And it doesn't hit the last applied configuration issue.
Right. It seems like Jordan is saying, like, why would someone use kubectl apply, and should we tell them not to?
Well, it's
Right.
not, it's partially that it's, okay, so, and maybe it's naive because it looked like maybe we had transgressed the threshold recently where this had become a problem. And I'm aware of the problem in context of upgrade in the past. And now that we're hitting it on initial install, I wasn't sure if it was already included in our reasoning and
I don't
expression.
Yeah,
I don't think
mean,
that was ever part of it. I think that this is probably like, I don't know exactly the best way to say this, but like, this is just a problem with kubectl apply for certain size manifests. And whether we cross that threshold or not, as long as we don't explicitly say somewhere in our docs, like use kubectl apply, then it seems like, and we have a separate install mechanism, it seems like the answer to this is kubectl suffers from this problem. Our CRDs are too big to use kubectl, use create, or use our install script. Like, to me, that seems like it's just sufficient to close it. If we wanted to, we could go to the extra effort of putting something in our docs that says explicitly, you cannot use kubectl apply for these resources because, and then point back to this issue or some docs about the last applied configuration thing.
Okay, so I definitely see that the install script does kubectl creates. And I presume that's because we acknowledge that this is an issue with the environment we operate in. And this is how we resolve it, and that's fine. I can definitely resolve this issue with this particular originator. Like I said originally, I wasn't sure if this meant we had crossed the Rubicon in some fashion that we needed to react to in documentation or something. It looks like we already crossed it, and I didn't see all of the mile markers.
Yeah, I think we should just instruct people to use the official installation steps, which are outlined here. And if they want to go and apply the resources themselves, they can always look. They can look at the install script we provide and like reverse engineer it to meet their needs. But I mean, everybody knows that, we started developing the CSV before the last line configuration thing came out, and we embedded a bunch of resources into that API. Doing so kind of just blew up the scope of that API to a point where anytime you apply this thing isn't going to really work. So there's no real way for us to go back and change that. We already have an official path for installing it. And if we could make some documentation that says like, don't do apply, but it seems like we should just point them to this ticket, write our official response on this issue. And then if people have questions, like just point them to it, because I mean, this is a kubectl issue, not an OLM issue, eh?
Concur. I can do that. Thank you.
So a quick question, because this might just be because I don't know necessarily enough about how the CRDs are actually working. If we do tell them to do create instead, that implies that they deleted first. And if they've deleted first, does that delete or affect any of the CRs that are currently on the cluster?
Deleting a CRD means that all the CRs are deleted.
So that
But-
wouldn't work for upgrade then.
Yeah, but we don't have an official upgrade strategy upstream. right
Well, you
now.
just have to update, like, it's a two-way merge instead of like apply gives you a three-way merge, right? So I don't know what the right invocation is of kubectl to do an in-place update off the top of my head, but I assume there is one.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
I was
delete
just looking at
create.
kubectl apply to see if there's a way to tell it not to update the previous the last apply configuration, but it doesn't seem to be that option. There's also kube control replace, but I think that under the covers just does a delete and recreate. But I'm not sure that I would be happy just closing this issue and saying, oh, well, you can't use apply if we have no alternative for upstream being able to upgrade a CRD without having to recreate all of the resources.
Yeah, we could modify this one to just like investigate how to move from, the current version -1 to the current version of OLM. And as soon as we figure out what the kubectl commands are, publishing it as part of the release. Like it might be nice if you're like to include anything that just says if you need an update from a previous release, run this script instead or something along those lines.
Right, so I definitely think that we need to have to provide a way to update CRD without deleting everything, even for upstream. Otherwise, it's kind of saying you can just use it as a playground. One question I had is the metadata added to the resources because of the client side apply, but I haven't tried it. But maybe if you use server-side apply, you wouldn't go into this issue. But I haven't tried with CRD.
I swear someone looked into all of this like a while ago, but I believe he left the team or the community rather. So now maybe the best path forward is just to create a ticket that, or even reformat this ticket so that we define how an upgrade could happen and like what the steps are for that, just so that people aren't forced into like using the, we don't want them to lose all their existing configurations when they try to upgrade to a new version of OLM, right? Right now, our only path is really uninstall or update it and, using your own convention. How about we create a ticket just to kind of call out the need to define how to upgrade or investigate how we could do an upgrade from one version of OLM to the next. Would anybody be interested in taking on that ticket? Therein lies the problem.
I can at least check if that works with server-side apply with CRD. I've done that.
Okay, so should we just create a new ticket that kind of calls this one out and link to this? Link from this one to that one?
Yeah, it kind of feels like we ought to, since the core issue on this one is initial install not working. And we're instead saying, hey, this makes us think that perhaps we need a stronger story around upgrade.
Okay.
While Alex is writing that up, Jordan, I noticed that in your comment you mentioned in the second statement that once OLM is installed, if you create a catalog source, then you can query the package manifest API. FYI, when you install one of the releases, upstream releases of OLM, it already installs a default catalog, the Opera Hub catalog. So you wouldn't essentially have to, go create one catalog source yourself. It'll just be like once OLM is installed successfully, you can just do get package manifest, and you should be able to see all of the packages available for install.
Yeah, I swear I didn't see that, but it may have been impatience on my end.
Oof. If you didn't see that, then that's probably another, like, it's worth confirming that you can see that, because that should be one of the, last installation steps for complete successful installations of upstream OLM release.
Yeah, well, offline, I'm definitely going to take another look at maybe what the install script does that is different than what this person was trying to brute force.
Okay.
Yeah. So almost done. So I'm just gonna call this up. So I would like the I'd like the OLM project to provide official steps for performing an upgrade. So just write some acceptance criteria down. Users are given a document to so it would be nice if this kind of like that. So it'd be nice when we cut a release to have the upgrade steps available just as we do the installation steps, right? And the idea is that we just want to be able to make sure that it's discoverable. I don't know that there's a do we want to put a requirement that it comes in the form of a script or something that's easily executable? Some of that might come out in the, as we investigate what this looks like. It may turn out that there's just a manual step that you have to do. So I'm hesitant to say that we make that a requirement. Perhaps we say we attempt to make it as seamless as possible by providing some script. And if that's not possible, the reason for the manual steps are called out in the PR that submits this documentation change or implements this ticket. Do we need to change anything?
I think you're missing a like in the describe the solution you'd like.
You see a like?
You're missing a like. It's a net. So in the statement, I would. It says
Oh.
I would. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is fine, right? So steps are upgrading all in the document made available in the release notes and we strive for as much automation as we can, but if annual steps are required, the reasoning should be called out with PR. And Frederick, were you the one that said you'd look into this?
Wait a second.
Did anyone agree to take this one on?
Yeah, I can have a look. So,
Okay, what is your GitHub handle, Frederick?
F and GILOUX.
F.
G, yeah, that's correct. FGILOUX.
LOUX. Oh,
Yeah, correct.
interesting. I can't find it. Oh, I'll just link it in the. I'll submit this issue and then I'll link it in the chat and you can sign it to yourself. Cool. Okay. And that completes our official topics on today's agenda. So is there anything anybody wants to propose we talk about before we move on to idea generation for the next milestone? Okay, so we go here. There's currently no discussions going on. Rather than type everything out in front of you guys, I thought it might make sense to just outline a process I was hoping for us to adopt. And then we could embrace that, and then we could talk to each of the milestone ideas that are generated at the next meeting. So I'll just go to the closed one. So right now, the way this has been working. Oh.
I'm just going to jump in briefly because I've got to go in 2 minutes. But just in the background, I've been messing with the CRD thing. I reproduced the issue in the ticket and that was fine. I tried to create and that worked. I then created a CR from that, tried a new create with a new version of the CSV, and it didn't delete the resources with replace. So I think kube control replace might work just fine. Just as an FYI, I'm going to write that in the ticket too. But I was just thought I'd fill in the call seeing as we were on it.
Perfect. It might be possible just to kind of update the install script to have updates if it like detects that the CRDs exist. So that could be a good idea to make it seamless.
Yep, but I'll just put a note in the ticket too.
Cool. And so something we've been doing with milestones is that Joe would go off, you create an ideation for milestone X, and then a bunch of people would submit different tickets, which is great. And we pick an answer based on those things and we'd talk about it. And what I'd like us to do, I can do this kind of like real time right now, is instead using this number 4 item, which was a stretch goal for the current one. We know we probably want to do this, add support for honoring upgrade edges defined in the catalog. What I could do is I go to a discussion. I would create a new discussion. It would be a release planning one. Click there. And I would just add support for this in the catalog and we'll delete this if you don't like this. Oh.
So Alex, I feel like this one probably wouldn't be like a release planning discussion. This would be more of like a idea, right?
Well, that's kind of my point. I feel like if we create idea, or are you saying ideas like this? Like
Yes,
just the
yeah.
category?
So my idea here, I think the thing that you're getting at here is like we're never actually talking about the underpinnings of the ideas that are listed in the release plan, right? Like, we're always just sort of scratching the surface. And what we need to do probably is like write some issues for things that we want to do. And by the time we get to the release planning discussion, we're just referencing issues that exist or other discussions that exist and not like retyping everything essentially, right?
Yeah, and the way I'd like to see this work is that we'd go to this discussion and, like you said, idea, and then if people like this, they, vote on it. And this would at least get some mechanism for having a backlog of ideas that we could pull into a release, and a voting mechanism that we could do asynchronously. So if somebody really liked the idea of honoring upgrade edges defined in the catalog, they could click this, and we'd be able to sort this by, the number of upvotes the idea basically gets. And then when we do release planning, we could just reference this list and make it really seamless to pull stuff in, rather than having to say, hey, you got to go find the release planning thing. You have to look at it. We then have to vote. You submit comments, and then we have to vote on each of them. And then if your idea didn't make it, when the next milestone thing is made, you then have to resubmit it. This basically gets rid of the task of resubmitting the idea all the time. Does that make sense to everybody?
Sounds good to me.
And I suppose there'd be like some step once, we define what's in the release planning, we'd go to the idea. We click the thing and we say like added as a part of milestone 5, and then we'd close the discussion. Right?
Either that, or we'd go generate some issue. Like, I feel like there might be cases where we have an idea that would end up spanning multiple releases because it's a big idea that requires lots of work.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe it is a case by case basis, but I could imagine us saying like, okay, this seems like we've sort of covered the gamut here. Here's a bunch of issues that we generated from this idea. And now like the first 2 are in the next milestone or something like that. But
yeah, that seems to
in my mind, like this is more of a producer of stuff, and we don't necessarily put in these things like, oh, we're trying to get this into a certain milestone. It's like we're just putting a bunch of ideas out there, and then the other side of it is the thing that says like, and now we're going to pull this stuff in because we're looking at what we can do in the scope of the next milestone.
Yeah, that seems reasonable to me. So basically using this as a way to propose where we should go, and then we use that to kind of mold the discussion. And then when we figure, hey, this is what we're actually going to do, there's a step where we start creating actual issues, and then we pull that one into the milestone. That seems
Yeah, and it could, and maybe another proposal here is like, rather than having a separate discussion, like once we have a bunch of issues created in the backlog, I can easily see us just going and creating another milestone and putting issues in the milestone that we think are maybe finger in the wind, the right thing, and then we just talk about what's in the milestone actually, like from the issue perspective, and then we can pull stuff in or move stuff out, and then it's like it's all just right there in the milestone and all the issues are right there, rather than having this sort of side discussion about it. I think the reason we've had the side discussion about it right now is just because we don't have the issues to back it up. So
Yeah.
if we had the issues to back it up, then we might not need this release planning discussion at all. We can just use the milestones directly.
right.
So one of the questions that I have around this is, I know in a lot of the release planning discussions we've had currently, we include ideas for like things of the need to implement. Are we comfortable with those same ideas living in the operator controller discussions? Because in the current release planning discussions, we have a little bit more fine grained, like catalog D should implement XYZ so that operator controller can do A, B, C. For these discussions, are we going to focus solely on the A, B, C for operator controller and then we go off and we create issues in catalog D for XYZ, or what's the thought for how we include things that need to be done in operator controllers dependencies?
I would like that approach to be taken just because I want a single place for people to get associated with the project rather than being asked to look at like 5 different repos and then somehow tie them all together, you know?
I think it almost seems like another, like it depends, right? Like if we have some work that's like, write another unit test for catalog D, that doesn't seem like it rises to the level of needing to be discussed in operator controller. And so to me, my instinct is if operator controller is going to have some noticeable impact due to a change, then it's fine. We can talk about it here. And then basically it's like, if the API changes or if something is improved performance wise, or the behavior somehow changes under the API, all of those are potentially like helpful or beneficial to operator controller. So it makes sense to like come at it from the perspective of like, it would be nice if operator controller was more performant, and because of that, like we really want catalog D to implement this improvement, yada yada yada. It's like all of those sorts of discussions seem like they make sense to initiate here. But if it's like some completely internal implementation detail or docs, or like something that's not going to be a change from the perspective of the operator API usage, then we probably shouldn't talk about it in the operator controller discussions, in my opinion.
Yeah, I thought we agreed to that though, when we were saying that like projects would be allowed to submit their own issues and pull it into their releases, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry, I thought we were talking about work related to the OLMV1 experience. Like I want this project to be the landing zone for anything OLMV1 driven. And then if the individual projects have like their own things that they want to do, they're open source projects and they can expand to support more than just the OLMV1 if they want to. And, in that effort, they can track that work themselves.
Yeah, well, the reason why I asked that question is because, and I think what Joe was saying makes a lot of sense, where like, if the operator controller has a specific use case for these changes, then it makes sense to talk about it in the operator controller discussions. The place I was creating that question from was there's been a lot of questions around like how catalog D does unpacking of catalog contents, right? Like what the actual unpacking process is from an image. And I don't think that has a direct user impact because the APIs are staying the same and all that kind of stuff. But so essentially, like my question was like, should that be a topic that we kind of discuss in the operator controller discussions, or is that better suited towards catalog D? And I think Joe's answer, at least my interpretation, is that that's probably better suited just to have conversations and discussions in catalog D, and avoid that being in the operator controller repo, because operator controller won't directly see those changes. Everything will stay the same for operator controller.
Yeah, that sounds perfect to me.
So let me ask a question on that, Bryce. So like in this particular unpacking case, the APIs, like there will be literally no PRs that change at all in operator. Like we don't have any code changes in operator controller at all, right? And there's no notice, like if we pull in that new version of catalog D as the updated dependency of operator controller, that's all we have to do. Like the only PR is change the version of the release that we depend on. Right?
Yeah.
But I think what Bryce is trying to get to, if I'm not wrong, Joe, is that makes perfect sense to have that discussion in the catalog D repo. But then milestone generation itself is happening in operator controller. So wherever, for example, milestone 4 gets generated, are we then saying that here are some issues, or here are some discussions from the operator controller and some discussions from the catalog D repo and some discussions from the depi repo? All of these are in milestone 4. Is that what we are landing on?
I would say those catalog D specific changes should fall in their milestone, then like their project milestone, not the view that we share. Like if it's something very specific that isn't related to OLMV1, I don't understand why we'd want to track it in a view that's meant to track OLMV1 progression, right? So, you know, in this case, if we have these things, and this is stuff saying how much progress we're making on OLMV1, but then there's like an operator controller V0.2.0, and I can pull other issues in here, and there's no reason. Like I don't see a requirement where every issue that appears in here has to appear here. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think this is a good reason that we should stop talking about the operator controller milestones as milestones. Like that's why I keep putting like milestone 3, but actually it's this version. Milestone 4 is actually this version. And so maybe for milestone 5, if we do another ideation one, like, or if we make a new release milestone, we'll just call it 0.3.0 or whatever. Like there will be no more milestone alignment with operator controller release versions. And maybe that solves the problem. Yes,
So
I think I agree with Alex, right? So like this view that we've got up right now, this makes sense. And the way that you get into this view is you put the label on your thing. I think this is an area we can iterate on too, though. Like it might be a little bit cumbersome and maybe there's a different way we can do it. But this seems like at least a reasonable way to see everything.
So then, for example, milestone 4 discussion. Because I'm confused, let's just think about milestone 4, right? Or milestone 5, the new milestone that we need to start next week. Are we saying that individual projects will then go and add milestone 5 labels, and as long as that milestone is not started, we'll view this board as for milestone 5 as the proposal, have the discussion on this board, add stuff in or take stuff out, and then once we declare we've started the milestone, it's all of these proposals getting accepted and the work's officially started. That's what we're talking about, right?
Kind of, but it gets weird, right? Because like operator controller is going to consume catalog D release versions. And so at the end of the day, whatever catalog D says is in a milestone really doesn't matter from the perspective of what the final release version of operator controller and all of its dependencies is. So that's where I feel like there's a little bit of, you know, iteration we can do on making this a little bit smoother. Because I guess what I'm saying is like, there's no direct linkage between like arbitrary issues and arbitrary projects can put OLMV1 in 4, but that doesn't really mean much when it comes down to like what actually made it, you know, unless we hold everything open and we do a really good job of making sure that it aligns with what actually ends up in a particular release. But like in my mind, the way that I think about this is operator controller is going to have an issue that says bump my catalog D dependency version. And that's the thing that really tracks all the underlying work that's going on in catalog D from the perspective of OLMV1.
So,
yeah,
so
so
let me ask it this way. The thing that Bryce talked about, the unpacking work that he wants to propose for milestone 5, what should the steps be for Bryce?
So if based on my interpretation, right, and because I also kind of want to check myself and make sure my interpretation is correct here. Based on my interpretation, the idea is that we would create our own like release milestone in catalog D, and we'd say we think we can get this unpacking change in this release of catalog D, right? And then what OLM or operator controller says is, you know, once wherever this release of catalog D is going to fall on my release cycle of operator controller, I'm going to make sure I have an issue to update to that version of catalog D, right? So no more in operator controller are we going to say catalog D should do XYZ right? Like operator controller would instead say, I have this functionality I need. I'm gonna go create an issue in catalog D. Catalog D is gonna prioritize that and put that into one of their release milestones. And once that's done, I, as a operator controller maintainer, need to be aware of when that functionality is going to be put in a catalog D release and tie that catalog D release to my release milestone. So like Joe said, we'd have like a bump catalog D to version XYZ issue in operator controller rather than like watching specific things in catalog D. Does
Yeah,
that sound about right?
I think that's about right. Think about how we would do this from operator controller's perspective if we had a totally separate project that we needed a feature or bug fix for. Someone would come to our project and say like, hey, I encountered a bug with your thing. And we'd say, oh, you know what? Like it looks like catalog D has a bug and now that bug is being exposed through our APIs. So, hey, by the way, like, thanks for telling us about our bug. We created this other issue over in catalog D that says what we think the bug is for them. And then we also said, like, in this issue that you reported, like, we have to wait for catalog D to be upgraded. We'll bump our version when theirs is bumped, et cetera, right? Like that, I think that's just the process we want to do for this kind of thing. So I guess what I would say is like, there might even be, there's like the thing, if operator controller has a certain thing that needs to happen, then we should have an issue in operator controller for that certain thing. And then if that depends on some other sub project changing, then let's go make that issue for that other sub project in their project. And then lastly, maybe we go and create another issue that's and then in the first issue, we say like, we're waiting on a release. And we leave that open. And maybe we put that issue in a milestone in operator controller. And then that just that's blocked effectively on like something else happening. And then when we get to the release date, we say like, well, did this happen? If not, like either we leave the release open, it's blocked, we can't close this release out. Or it merged, and then in which case, like we need to go create a PR that bumps our dependency version, and then we can retest and verify that the issue is solved and close the issue. But yeah, I guess I would just think of catalog D as like a completely unrelated dependency project that we don't control, and think about how we would work with that other community.
Yeah, and Joe, perhaps sometime this week, we can start up some discussion and just get this board in the correct state to reflect what this is going to look like. Because I think like right here, add unit test board catalogs or this reconcile, right? Like this is something that probably will have to exist in this view, but like let's.
Well, that's where like the rubber hits the road. Like, are we trying to track everything that we're working on all the projects? Because then that makes sense here. Because maybe someone wants to see all the work. Or like if we have a community of people that are interested in working on any of the projects, then it might make sense to see everything that's out there, something we want to do. And maybe you go over into the to do or the no status column or whatever, and you say like, hey, I'm interested in working on this. So I think there is value in a view like this, but regardless, like I think this conversation has gone on a while, but I think there's some iteration we can do.
Thanks. So I guess what I would like to get out of this conversation before we end it is just some clarification, because I'm actually slightly led astray from what I thought we were doing. So we were just saying that we want this one to represent all work that we care about from the OLM perspective. Adding unit tests to the catalog source, reconcile it, doesn't seem to be particularly important from the OLM experience standpoint. It seems like it's a catalog D specific ask. We would just like make their test portfolio more robust. And it seems like that would be an issue that we wouldn't hear.
I don't know if I agree, Alex. Like, what is OLM catalog D? The sole purpose of catalog D is a thing that is a sub-project of OLM v1 right now. So like in that context, everything we do in catalog D is related to OLM v1. Whether operator controller cares about it is a different story. I think that's the distinction.
Oh, sorry, you were talking about like if we have some catalog D change that we need to make at this level.
Yeah.
I see, okay. You're saying for everything here, okay.
Well, in fact, you've got an issue in there that's actually a good example, right? Like
That'd be
if you go
so-
back to that other view. Operators should be reconciled on any catalog source change. Like, okay, well, maybe that means we need something to change in catalog D. That might have derived some other sub issues out in the catalog D project, but from the operator controller project, like we care about this in the operator controller. So we've got an issue that talks about what we care about.
I think. So, yeah, so we've got. This one is really just creating an event watcher, so it's not for people, but if there were issues that had to happen, or sorry, if there were changes that needed to happen in the catalog D project, what you're saying is. We could reference them here, but we'd also have a tracker, like another issue that just says bump catalog D to version XYZ, right?
Yeah, and then that issue would be blocked, we'd say like, hey, we're waiting on this thing to close out before we can say that this one's done.
Here. We put everything, the deputy stuff, all the catalog D stuff, and readme changes they have planned, absolutely everything. So we can say what's happening in every project. That's what we know. Right?
Yeah, ideally, I mean, this is a work in progress. I think like in an ideal world, every sub project's release milestones are aligned with some high, well, I don't even know if this is an ideal world, right? But like, what are the things that we're currently working on is a view that would be helpful for the community to be able to see across the board. Whether those are aligned to milestones or sprints or releases or whatever, I don't know. So that's why I say like I don't think we should get super prescriptive and tell everyone exactly how to do everything because I'm not sure it's right. So in my mind, it's like let's best effort it and we can talk about specific aspects of the various views that we have that work and don't work and figure out if there's a change we can make. In my mind, like what we have now is pretty good. So like if we have a problem with it, then let's talk about it. But
So all I want is to make sure that everybody has a high level understanding of what we're hoping to see, and what it seems to be is if it's related to OLM-V1, make sure it shows up in this board for each milestone. And then if you're doing stuff in your project and it relies on something else, make a tracker ticket just to say bump dependency on X. And use your project milestone to pull in extra work that's related to just your project. Right?
wonder, yeah, I'm gonna go play with this a little bit because it would be nice to see like a filter that's like is in a milestone at all. Because then you wouldn't have to put like labels, like you wouldn't have to have a label OLM-V1 M4 on here. You could just see like stuff that's in a milestone and then in an issue milestone at all. Like it doesn't have to be a specific one. That's what I want to know. Like,
yeah, I tried using this earlier and I just.
but I'll play with this offline, and if I find anything interesting that makes this easier, I'll report back up.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to do a much bigger discussion than I thought it was going to be. But Bryce, Monik, how are we feeling? Like at a high level, does that sound good to you? And just to reiterate, anything related to OLM-V1 progress goes in this board, and then use your milestone to communicate what's going to be worked on and tie it to a release version. That's the mission. We're like, is that enough guidance for you guys to manage the catalog B issues?
It does. I'm just a little concerned about the next sprint itself. Like if we can get all of that ready with, but in a nice, organized manner before the next meeting or not. But I guess that's fine. We'll just bootstrap something, see how it works out.
I would not worry about this view for your next sprint if that's what you worry about. All I would worry about is like, let's go and make the catalog D next milestone in catalog D and put some issues there. And then we can figure out the higher level views separate.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing that I was trying to get at with my question is like, where should we be doing that as catalog D maintainers? And I think that this cleared that up because I had plans to, reach out to Anik and say like, hey, let's get together and figure out figuring out what's next for catalog D, and wanted to make sure we're going to be doing that in the right place.
Okay. Well, on that note, we only have 5 minutes left. Is there anything anybody wants to squeeze into this meeting before we move on to the next one? Okay, and I'll make sure that today's, and I think May 16th, I still need to upload. So I'll upload both of those recordings to YouTube, and I will send a message in the Slack channel. All right. On that note, everybody, I want to thank you for participating in the discussion today, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you, Alex. Later, folks.